In the unfolding story of Manifest a New Reality with the Power of Your Mind, Dr. Joe Dispenza invites the viewer into a world where thought becomes the architect of destiny and where the invisible intelligence that shapes the universe responds to the human mind with astonishing precision. He explains that most people live in a predictable loop, waking up with the same emotions, recalling the same problems, and stepping into the same patterns of behavior that reinforce the past. This predictable cycle becomes a psychological prison, trapping individuals in a reality that feels immovable, even though the true barrier is the subconscious conditioning they never question. Dr. Dispenza shares how the brain operates like a record of everything already known, filled with neural pathways that fire in familiar and repetitive combinations. These pathways become so deeply ingrained that a person begins to think the same thoughts, feel the same emotions, and unconsciously create the same outcomes day after day. But the moment someone decides to break this cycle, by observing their automatic reactions instead of surrendering to them, they unlock the first step toward personal transformation. He emphasizes that the mind must be trained to detach from old emotional signatures, because emotions are the residue of past experiences, and as long as one continues to feel the same emotions, they continue to live the same life. The story guides the viewer into the profound possibility that by altering thinking patterns, energy shifts, and emotional responses, the quantum field of potential responds by reorganizing circumstances in remarkable ways. This is where the journey begins, with awareness, intention, and a willingness to step beyond the familiar. Dr. Dispenza then introduces the idea that the body becomes addicted to the emotions that define a person's identity, making it difficult to rise above the pull of the past. He explains that every emotion, whether fear, guilt, resentment, or frustration, sends chemical signals throughout the body, teaching cells to expect and crave those feelings. Over time, the body begins to operate like the subconscious mind itself, memorizing emotions so deeply that it takes more effort to change them than to stay in the comfort of the old familiar self. In this story, he offers an example of someone attempting to create a new life while still carrying old emotional baggage. They may visualize success, peace, abundance, or healing, but if internally they are still broadcasting emotions of lack, stress, or unworthiness, the conflicting signals create a mixed message to the field of possibility. He describes this as trying to hold two opposing frequencies at the same time, one rooted in fear and memory, the other rooted in hope and possibility. The body, being conditioned by years of repetition, often wins, pulling the mind back into familiar emotional states before new outcomes have time to manifest. To escape this loop, Dr. Dispenza explains that a person must enter a state beyond their analytical mind, a state where consciousness is expanded and habitual emotional patterns dissolve. Through meditation and focused intention, he teaches individuals to observe their internal world with clarity, allowing them to slowly free themselves from the emotional addictions that define the old self. By doing so, they begin to generate elevated emotions, gratitude, joy, love, and inspiration, which align with the life they wish to create. These elevated emotions are not mere feelings, they are powerful signals that influence the field around them, drawing experiences that match the vibration of the new personality they are becoming. As the story deepens, Dr. Dispenza shares transformative accounts of individuals who learned how to connect intention with elevated emotion to create astonishing results in their lives. He speaks of people who healed from chronic illnesses, reversed limiting beliefs, manifested opportunities they never imagined, and awakened to a life that once seemed impossible. He emphasizes that these changes were not miracles in the traditional sense, but rather outcomes of aligning the mind and body with the future rather than the past. Each story reveals a pattern. The moment someone becomes greater than their environment, greater than their old emotions, and greater than their self-limiting thoughts, reality begins to rearrange itself. This shift occurs when the person's internal state no longer depends on external circumstances for validation. Instead, they generate the emotional signature of their desired reality before it appears. Dr. Dispenza describes this as becoming the generator of reality, not the reactor to circumstances. He explains that when someone repeatedly enters a meditative state and envisions their future with clarity, feeling as though it has already happened, they activate neural networks in the brain that mirror the experience of the desired event. The body then receives signals consistent with the new personality, believing it is already living in that future. Over time, the gap between the internal experience and the external world closes, leading to synchronicities, opportunities, and life changes that seem serendipitous, but are actually the results of coherent intention. This part of the story illustrates the essence of manifestation, becoming energetically aligned with the reality you wish to create long before it arrives. Dr. Dispenza then dives into the science behind this phenomenon, explaining how the heart and brain must function in harmony to influence reality at a quantum level. He shares research showing that the heart generates a powerful electromagnetic field, far stronger than the brain's, capable of broadcasting emotional energy far beyond the body. When the brain is incoherent, filled with doubt, fear, or divided intention, the signal it sends is weak and fragmented. But when the brain is coherent and the heart is activated with elevated emotion, the two create a unified signal that interacts with the quantum field in meaningful ways. This coherent energy becomes a form of communication that the universe responds to. He describes how meditation becomes the tool through which individuals synchronize their brainwaves, slow down their internal chaos, and align with a state of inner peace and clarity. When the heart and brain enter coherence, the body exits survival mode and enters creation mode. In this state, the past loses its grip and the future becomes malleable. Dr. Dispenza explains that the laws of the quantum field operate differently from the material world. They respond not to force, but to frequency. Therefore, a person does not manifest by trying harder, but by aligning deeper, by generating the emotional and mental state of already possessing what they seek. This part of the story illustrates how manifestation becomes not a mystical idea, but a measurable interaction between consciousness and the field of potential. It is within this coherence that the power of the mind becomes the architect of new realities. In the continuation of the story, Dr. Dispenza guides the viewer into the moment where transformation becomes not just a concept, but a lived internal shift. He explains that true change requires stepping into the unknown, an uncomfortable space where the familiar identity dissolves and the new self has not yet fully formed. Most people retreat at this stage because the brain, conditioned by years of survival-driven programming, signals danger whenever it encounters uncertainty. This causes the body to generate stress hormones, pushing the individual back into their old emotional patterns. Dr. Dispenza emphasizes that this is precisely the barrier between the old life and the new one. He encourages individuals to remain in the unknown, breathe through the discomfort, and view uncertainty as a doorway rather than a threat. In this part of the narrative, he describes how individuals must train themselves to feel elevated emotions even when the external world gives them no evidence that their desired outcome is coming. This emotional mastery becomes the sign of a person who has broken free from cause-and-effect living and entered a state where the mind creates reality instead of the environment dictating their state of being. Dr. Dispenza introduces stories of individuals who once felt trapped by circumstances but learned to sustain elevated emotions long enough for their outer world to respond. He teaches that the unknown is the place where possibilities live, and the longer someone remains emotionally connected to their desired reality, even without physical proof, the faster that reality begins to materialize. This part of the story shows the viewer that manifesting is not about manipulating outcomes. It is about transforming who you are at your core so that your new identity naturally attracts the experiences aligned with it. Moving deeper into the narrative, Dr. Dispenza highlights the importance of consistency and repetition when creating a new reality. He states that just as the old self was built through years of repeated thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, the new self must be reinforced through conscious, deliberate practice. Meditation becomes a daily ritual through which individuals condition their minds to detach from old patterns and reinforce the neural pathways associated with their desired future. He explains that each time a person mentally rehearses a new scenario with clarity, emotion, and intention, The brain begins to map that experience as though it is already occurring. Over time, these mental rehearsals become new subconscious programs that replace outdated habits of thinking and feeling. Dr. Dispenza adds that the emotional component is crucial. Without elevated emotions such as gratitude, joy, and love, the brain's new connections lack the energy needed to make them durable. He shares examples of individuals who committed to daily practice despite their doubts and eventually witnessed extraordinary shifts in health, relationships, finances, and purpose. The people who succeed are those who persist even when nothing seems to be changing, because the act of becoming the future self is an internal process that must solidify before the external reflects it. He reiterates that the old personality must die for the new reality to be born, and this death is not painful but liberating, a shedding of the emotional burdens that once held a person hostage to their past. In this chapter of the story, the viewer learns that manifestation is not an overnight event, but a disciplined evolution of consciousness. Dr. Dispenza then shifts the focus toward the relationship between intention, energy, and the quantum field, explaining that every thought carries a frequency and every emotion amplifies that frequency. When a person lives in stress or survival mode, they emit incoherent signals dominated by fear, scarcity, and self-protection. These frequencies communicate with the field and pull experiences that match those emotional signatures. In contrast, when a person elevates their emotional state and aligns their intention with clear, positive thoughts, they emit a coherent frequency that attracts opportunities aligned with growth, abundance, and transformation. He emphasizes that the universe responds not to what we want but to who we are being. In this segment of the story, he describes individuals who became so aligned with their desired reality that coincidences, synchronicities, and opportunities began to flow into their lives effortlessly. These events, often regarded as luck, are actually signs of coherence, proof that internal alignment produces external results. Dr. Dispenza also discusses how the quantum field operates beyond linear time. Therefore, manifestation does not come from forcing outcomes, but from becoming the version of oneself who naturally exists within that desired future. The viewer begins to understand that manifestation is not magic, it is resonance. When the internal frequency matches the frequency of the future, the two realities merge, collapsing possibility into physical form. This part of the story reveals that the universe is not responding to wishes, but to vibrational alignment. In the final part of the story, Dr. Dispenza brings the narrative full circle by reminding viewers that the true journey is not about manifesting material outcomes, but about becoming a more conscious, empowered, and elevated version of themselves. He emphasizes that once someone learns to regulate their emotions, align their intentions, and break free from the limitations of their past, they gain the ultimate freedom, the ability to choose who they want to be in every moment. This internal transformation naturally leads to external changes, but the real victory lies in reclaiming sovereignty over the mind and body. Dr. Dispenza encourages the viewer to continue practicing awareness, meditation, emotional regulation, and future-focused thinking, not as temporary techniques, but as a lifestyle of conscious creation. He closes the story with the idea that every person holds within them the power to reshape their destiny by shifting their internal state, and that the universe responds most powerfully to those who live in coherence, gratitude, and elevated emotion. He reminds the audience that the future is not something they wait for, it is something they generate through their thoughts, feelings, and intentions. The message ends with a powerful realization that the mind is not just a tool for processing reality, but the force that constructs it. By mastering this force, anyone can step into a new reality, transform their life, and become the creator of their destiny.